En un mundo donde las máscaras pesan más que los rostros, algunos pocos se atrevieron a hablar. Algunos pagaron el precio. Otros todavía resuenan como un eco incómodo en los rincones olvidados de Internet. Esta es la segunda parte de las voces que no se callaron. No olvides que lo importante no es el mensajero, lo verdaderamente importante es el mensaje. Descendamos juntos por esta madriguera y archivemos este capítulo, para que el olvido no diga presente de forma tan rápida. Muchas gracias por estar ahí y espero que disfrutes del video.
Nivel -2. Jacques Attali. Para cambiar un poco del rubro del entretenimiento, te traigo a Jacques Attali, un economista, ingeniero, político, alto funcionario, director de orquesta, novelista, polímata quien ha publicado 86 libros, y fue asesor del presidente francés François Mitterrand, y trabajó en la comisión de Nicolas Sarkozy. Un tipo que se codeó con la élite de la política y que predijo lo que sucedió allá por el año 2020, pero hizo unas declaraciones aún más profundas.
Sur les personnes aussi, on peut imaginer une traçabilité encore plus grande.
Parce que sur les objets, on connaît, mais sur les organismes vivants, que ce soit les animaux ou les êtres humains, qui pourront avoir une puce électronique implantée dans le corps.
Mais avant de parler de l'implantation des organismes vivants, il faut regarder tout ce qui va se passer aussi sur les moyens de paiement et sur la surveillance même dans la vie quotidienne de nos enfants ou de nos petits-enfants. Bientôt, on va pouvoir avoir dans les grands magasins ou dans les magasins de grande surface des caddies intelligents qui vont, lorsque vous passez devant un rayon, vous montrer sur un écran de télévision, grâce à des RFID, l'historique et le détail, avec la publicité nécessaire, des produits devant lesquels vous passez. Ensuite, vous le mettez dans votre caddie et vous sortez du magasin sans payer, puisqu'on aura sur soi une carte RFID qui va vous identifier votre compte bancaire. Et,
en payant, mais sans s'arrêter à la caisse, vous voulez dire?
Oui, on paiera, mais sans s'arrêter à la caisse. Tout ce qu'on peut imaginer, c'est tout ce qui permettra, soit de façon positive, soit de façon inquiétante, de surveiller les gens.
On a parlé de mettre des puces RFID sur des nourrissons dans des maternités.
D'abord, on pourra mettre sous forme de bracelet, en effet, des puces RFID pour identifier les nourrissons et savoir où ils sont en permanence, pour éviter les échanges, mais ça, on sait le faire autrement.
Des kidnappings.
Pour éviter des kidnappings. On peut imaginer que chaque individu accepte volontairement ou sans le savoir une puce en lui qui contiendrait toute une série d'informations sur lui.
Et sur ses entrées dans les différents clubs de sport, écoles, bâtiments sécurisés.
Qui permettrait à la fois de payer tout, de tout savoir, mais donc d'être libéré d'un certain nombre de contraintes. Le vrai luxe de demain, ce sera d'être isolable, de pouvoir s'isoler. Et la vraie liberté, ce ne sera pas d'être relié aux autres, de pouvoir leur communiquer, qui est évidemment nécessaire, mais ce sera le droit de ne pas être branché. Donc je pense qu'il y aura des systèmes de brouillage qui vont apparaître. Ils existent déjà.
Brouillage des ondes émises par la puce.
Et il y aura aussi, de la part de chacun d'entre nous, une exigence morale et matérielle de vérifier en permanence qu'on n'est pas involontairement connecté.
C'est ce qui va être le plus difficile, certainement.
Bah oui, comme les gens plus ou moins importants ou qui se croient tels, qui font en permanence vérifier que leur bureau n'est pas sous écoute, il y aura de la part de chacun d'entre nous une vérification permanente, une vigilance à l'égard du branchement involontaire sur des réseaux sur lesquels on ne souhaiterait pas être connecté et dans lesquels on est déjà de mille et une façons en relation avec les autres sans le savoir.
Est-ce qu'on pourrait imaginer?
Aaron Russo. Aaron Russo fue un cineasta, activista político y emprendedor nacido en los Estados Unidos. Realizó un famoso documental contra el Servicio de Impuestos Internos y el Sistema de Reserva Federal. Aaron Russo compartía una amistad con un integrante de la familia Rockefeller, y en una entrevista dijo algo que dejó a más de uno con la boca abierta.
Send them a check, right? So they take it out automatically because they know people aren't going to want to pay it. So what's happened is that through the implementation of the Federal Reserve System, the government has become vested in these bankers, and they get their money from the bankers. And so then they impose a tax on us, which makes us more slaves, makes it more difficult for us to survive, right? Giving them more profits. And now what's happened is that through the Federal Reserve System, the bankers have pretty much taken control of our government. It doesn't matter Republican and Democrat anymore, because they're both the same. Neither one of them are talking about shutting down the Federal Reserve System or stopping the payment of taxes, you know, or any of the big issues that face Americans, right? So I had a friend, Nick Rockefeller, okay, who was one of the Rockefeller family, and he, when I was running for governor in Nevada, he came to me, introduced himself to me through an attorney, and we became friends. We started talking about things, and I learned an awful lot from Mr. Rockefeller. And one of the things that we used to talk about was the ultimate plan of the banking industry, what they wanted to accomplish. And the goals of the banking industry, not just the Federal Reserve System, but the private banks in Germany and England, all over Italy, all over the world, they all work together. They're all central banks, and they're all part of the Communist Manifesto. You know, central banking is one of the major planks of the Communist Manifesto. We talk about America being a capitalistic country, but yet at the same time we have a central bank that plans everything for us, right? And the graduated income tax is another plank of the Communist Manifesto, right? So right there you have two major planks of the Communist Manifesto that have been brought in because of the Federal Reserve System, okay? So the ultimate goal that these people have in mind is the goal to create a one-world government run by the banking industry, run by the bankers, and they're doing it in sections. The European currency, the euro, and the European Constitution is one part of it. Now they're trying to do it in America with the North American Union, right? And they want to create a new currency called the Amero, right? And the whole agenda is to create a one-world government where everybody has an RFID chip implanted in them. All money is to be in those chips, right? There'll be no more cash. And this is given me straight from Rockefeller himself. This is what they want to accomplish. And all money will be in your chips. And so, instead of having cash, anytime you have money in your chip, they can take out whatever they want to take out whenever they want to. If they say you owe us this much money in taxes, they just deduct it out of your chip digitally.
Total control.
Total control. And if you're like me or you, and you're protesting what they're doing, they can just turn off your chip. And you have nothing. You can't buy food. You can't do anything. It's total control of the people.
And that chip's connected to a database that has your purchasing records, what you do, what
everything.
you sell.
Everything is in there, you know? And so they want a one-world government controlled by them, everybody being chipped, all your money in those chips, and they control the chips, and they control people. And you become a slave. You become a serf to these people. That's their goal. That's their intentions. And he's the one who told me 11 months before 9/11 ever happened that there was going to be an event. Never told me what the event was going to be, but there was going to be an event. And out of that event, we were going to invade Afghanistan to run pipelines from the Caspian Sea. We were going to invade Iraq, you know, to take over the oil fields, establish a base in the Middle East, and make it all part of the New World Order. And we go after Chavez in Venezuela. And sure enough, later 9/11 happened, and I remember he was telling me how how you're going to see soldiers looking in caves for people in Afghanistan and Pakistan and all these places, and there's going to be this war on terror, which is no real enemy, and the whole thing is a giant hoax, you know, but it's a way for the government to take over the American people.
He told you it was going to be a hoax.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, there's no question. He says there's going to be war on terror, and he's just laughing. There's no who are we fighting? I mean, why do you think 9/11 happened, and then nothing's happened since then? Do you think that our security is so great here that these people who pulled off 9/11, who were able to, can't knock down another plane? Come on, it's ridiculous. 9/11 was done by people in our own government and our own banking system to perpetuate the fear of the American people into subordinating themselves to anything the government wants them to do. That's what it's about, and to create this war, this endless war on terror. And that's why and that was the first lie. And the next lie was going into Iraq, you know, to get Saddam Hussein out with his weapons of mass destruction. That was the next lie.
Gary Webb, periodista de investigación estadounidense, ganador de numerosos premios, entre ellos un premio Pulitzer. Pero, hay un dicho que dice que el mayor logro de un periodista no es el hecho de recibir un premio, sino que el mayor logro de un periodista es que la CIA te desaparezca de la existencia. Escucha atentamente las palabras de este héroe del periodismo.
My name is Gary Webb. I am an investigative journalist. I've been an investigative journalist for about 25 years for daily newspapers. And in 1996, I wrote a series of stories entitled Dark Alliance, which was about CIA involvement in drug trafficking. What my story showed was that the cocaine that was being sold in those neighborhoods was coming from mainly one source, and this one source was being used to finance a guerrilla war in Central America. The general idea of the CIA dealing drugs was something that the American mainstream press had never written about before, and that's why it prompted outrage among blacks, among drug reform activists, among politicians, by the CIA, by every federal agency involved in the drug war, because it showed they weren't doing their jobs. There was a fraud. The government reaction was no reaction. And this, I believe, was a very careful strategy, because nobody was going to believe the government if they came out and said we didn't do it. The proof was fairly overwhelming, since we had all these government documents showing that it did happen. So what happened was they let the so-called liberal press speak for them. And they had the national security reporters at the Washington Post, who coincidentally used to work for the CIA. It was a distraction from what the story said, and it became sort of a media war between the Mercury News, which stood behind the story at that point, and the rest of the establishment media, who wanted us to back away from it. And part of that reason was because these major newspapers had written about this issue back in the 1980s, but had written about it very dismissively, as if this is nonsense, it doesn't happen, it never happened. And then 10 years later, we came back with documentation showing that it was absolutely true, and that it was worse than it. We had gotten a story out around them, and we had gotten it out in a big way that they couldn't control. That was through the internet. And I think a lot of this was directed to the Mercury News to say, we don't care what documentation you have, we don't care what kind of story you've got, we set the national news agenda. And if we don't like your story, we will kill your story, regardless of the truth.
Woody Harrelson. Woody Harrelson es un actor y dramaturgo estadounidense de cine, teatro y televisión. Ha participado en numerosas películas famosas como Los Juegos del Hambre o Bienvenidos a Sarajevo. Pero lo que lo trae aquí fue su inusual discurso sobre lo sucedido en el año 2020. Escucha y saca tus propias conclusiones.
So the movie goes like this. The biggest drug cartels in the world get together and buy up all the media and all the politicians and force all the people in the world to stay locked in their homes, and people can only come out if they take the cartel's drugs and keep taking them over and over. I threw the script away. I mean, who is going to believe that crazy idea, being forced to do drugs? I do that voluntarily all day long. Anyway, it's about that time.
Corey Feldman es un actor y músico estadounidense conocido por actuar en películas como Los Goonies. Su carrera comenzó a temprana edad, pero su vida se convertiría en el claro reflejo de que no todo lo que brilla es oro. Sus acusaciones hicieron temblar, más de una vez, toda la industria del entretenimiento y la política. Escucha lo que tenía para decirnos.
On the show, you described your childhood as painful. I saw the soundbite that you said that. What was the most painful part about it?
Well, you know, when you're a kid that's being locked in a room and told that they have to memorize a record before they can come out and get food, or before they can, you know, play with a toy or function at all in any way. And then they finally come out, and if they don't get it right, then they get smacked and put back in that room. Or, you know, let's say you have to memorize a script, and it's the same thing. If you don't come out with the script word for word and backwards and forwards, then, you know, you don't get dinner, or you don't get to go to bed until you've done this, or, you know, you can't go to school tomorrow if you don't have your lines down, or, you know, maybe you have to get out of school tomorrow because you've got auditions, so we're going to pick you up early, or, you know, there's no one thing for my childhood. I had a screwed up childhood, and I don't wish it on anybody.
Yeah.
Nobody should have to live like that. No child should be a slave and not have the right to make their own decisions and do what they want and become what they want in this life, because life is about freedom of choice. You know, so anytime we're bound and gagged and told this is what you must do and you don't have a say in the matter, that's not okay. Frances Fisher just got an opportunity to be part of the board over at SAG, and she's a dear friend of mine. And we're going to be working together to try and help change some of the rules and regulations when it comes to kids on the set.
Wow.
Because the thing is like, there's obvious stuff that can be fixed, such as no person on the set should ever have access to a child to where they will take them in their car away from the set and without supervision of the parent or the guardian. That should never happen. Not for 5 minutes. And it happens every day. Happens all the time in our industry. Okay? Staying over at the manager's house tonight. Staying over at the publicist's house tonight. How many people don't realize that it's the managers and the publicists that are doing this crap most of the time? Hi, this is Corey Feldman. I'm coming to you today to talk to you about what's on everybody's mind. I told everybody a few days ago that I had a plan to try and hopefully bring to light what is happening in the world of entertainment as far as perverts and pedophiles and all of the topics of what we've been discussing. What I'm proposing is a plan that I believe can literally change the entertainment system as we know it. And I believe that I can also bring down, potentially, a pedophile ring that I've been aware of since I was a child. Right off the bat, I can name 6 names. One of them who is still very powerful today. And a story that links all the way up to a studio. It connects pedophilia to one of the major studios. I am very afraid to do this. It's not easy. I've been living in fear and been living with this my entire life. As most victims have, I've been made to feel awkward, misunderstood, and I've been degraded at great levels. Rumors have been told, stories have been made up about me, and I've been insulted and degraded in ways that were unimaginable to me, all because they fear what I know as the truth. I propose to do this by making a film that'll be the most honest and true depiction of child abuse ever portrayed, by telling my own story in a very real way, in a very honest way, with no editing, no censorship, no studio behind it. I will...
Drake Bell. Drake Bell es un actor famoso por alegrar al público adolescente durante muchos años, a través del famoso programa televisivo Drake and Josh, de la cadena de Nickelodeon, propiedad de Paramount Global, una poderosa corporación multinacional. Los detalles son importantes, porque la ruta del dinero siempre nos lleva a los verdaderos responsables. Pero lo que pocos sabían era el elevado precio que tuvo que pagar Drake para alegrar la infancia de muchos. El joven actor tuvo que hipotecar su propia infancia.
Mi nombre es Drake Bell y vine aquí a contarles mi historia. Nunca he contado mi historia en público. En retrospectiva creo que debí haberlo visto, pero ya sabes, a esa edad no lo notas. Pero mi papá no notó a la distancia. Y una noche que me quedé en casa del productor Brian, me quedé en el sofá donde usualmente me quedaba y luego desperté con el Abrí los ojos y desperté y él estaba abusándome. Y me congelé y estaba asustado y no supe cómo sentirme o cómo reaccionar. Y siempre se disculpaba como, esto no va a volver a pasar, lo lamento mucho, no sé qué me pasó, crucé una línea, no va a volver a suceder. Y bueno, encontró la manera de convencer a mi mamá, a todos los que me rodeaban y tenerme, ya sabes, siempre que quería hacer una audición o necesitaba ayuda para ensayar un diálogo, de alguna manera terminaba otra vez en casa de Brian. Sin saber, él empezó a dar una confesión completa y luego él me preguntó una y otra vez si yo lo estaba grabando. El día de la sentencia para Brian, me presenté en la corte y fue de lo peor que jamás he visto. Todo su lado, en la corte, estaba lleno. Lleno. Definitivamente reconocía algunas de las caras de ese lado del cuarto. De mi lado estaba yo, mi mamá y mi hermano. Ryan había sido condenado, pero con todo este apoyo de mucha gente de la industria y fue muy traumático. Testifiqué frente a todos en la habitación. Los miré a todos ellos. Les dije cómo se atreven. Y dije, ustedes siempre recordarán estar sentados en la corte defendiendo a este hombre. Y yo, por siempre recordaré a la persona que defienden abusándome y haciendo indescriptibles actos y crímenes. Y eso es lo que recuerdo.
Nivel -3. George Orwell. Bien, ahora empezamos a descender a lo más oscuro de esta madriguera. Eric Arthur Blair, mejor conocido como George Orwell, fue un novelista, poeta, ensayista y crítico inglés que nos dejó perplejos con sus proféticas obras, las cuales describen muy bien lo que sucede hoy en el mundo. Como todo buen crítico, Eric, o mejor dicho George, tenía una advertencia sobre el curso que estaba tomando nuestra humanidad.
1984 is, I believe, a quite terrifying masterpiece. So terrifying, in fact, I don't think I should like to read another like it.
I'm not absolutely dissatisfied with it. I think it is a good idea, but the execution would have been better if I had not been under the influence of TB when I wrote it.
You once claimed that you have an ability to face unpleasant facts. Is that what you demonstrated in 1984 by drawing an accurate portrait of the future?
I think that allowing for the book being, after all, a parody, something like 1984 could actually happen. This is the direction the world is going in at the present time. In our world, there will be no emotions except fear, rage, triumph and self-abasement. The sex instinct will be eradicated. We shall abolish the orgasm. There will be no loyalty except loyalty to the party. But always there will be the intoxication of power. Always, at every moment, there will be the thrill of victory, the sensation of trampling on an enemy who is helpless. If you want a picture of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever. The moral to be drawn from this dangerous nightmare situation is a simple one. Don't let it happen. It depends on you.
Russell Brand. Russell Brand es un humorista, compositor, cantante y actor británico con una gran trayectoria en la radio y la televisión. Russell es una persona muy inteligente, que siempre nos saca una sonrisa con sus rápidos y espontáneos razonamientos. Ahora bien, parece que Russell Brand no se aguantó más y tuvo que salir a hablar sobre la famosa ecuación: problema, acción, solución.
May I say something?
Please,
if they
please
inconvenience
do.
you, I'll stop saying them. The pandemic created at least 40 new big pharma billionaires. Pharmaceutical corporations like Moderna and Pfizer made $1,000 of profit every second from the COVID-19 vaccine. More than two-thirds of Congress received campaign funding from pharmaceutical companies in the 2020 election. Pfizer chairman Albert Bourla told Time magazine in July 2020 that his company was developing a COVID vaccine for the good of humanity, not for money. And of course, Pfizer made $100 billion in profit in 2022. And may I just mention, finally, and this is also a fact, that you, the American public, funded the development of that. The German public funded the BioNTech vaccine. When it came to the profits, they took the profits. When it came to the funding, you paid for the funding. All I'm querying is this.
Yes.
Is if you have an economic system in which pharmaceutical companies benefit hugely from medical emergencies, where a military-industrial complex benefits from war, where energy companies benefit from energy crises, you are going to generate states of perpetual crisis, where the interests of ordinary people separate from the interests of the elite. Do you think you can improve America by determinedly and avowedly condemning Fox News without acknowledging that you're participating in the same game? Did you not just listen to Bernie Sanders, someone who plainly, legitimately believes in this country and believes it's possible to change, but is bound by corruption, is bound by the lobbying system? Surely it's clear to you, Bill, as one of the great pundits and experts and comic voices, that systemic change is required. Money has to be taken out of politics. We need new political systems that genuinely represent ordinary Americans so that we can overcome cultural differences. And bickering about which propagandist network is the worst is not going to save a single American life, not improve the life of a single American child, not going to improve America's standing in the world, and the world needs a strong America, I'll tell you that.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Robert Kennedy Jr. es sobrino de uno de los presidentes más famosos de los Estados Unidos. Actualmente es el secretario de Salud y Servicios Humanos de los Estados Unidos. Su vida es un claro ejemplo de que la defensa de los ideales, la fidelidad a las convicciones, viene de la mano con un precio muy elevado, como por ejemplo, la condena social. Ahora escucha algunas de las cosas que Robert ha compartido a lo largo de los años.
There is nothing more profitable in our society today than a sick child, because all of these entities are making money on them. The insurance companies, the hospitals, the medical cartel, the pharmaceutical companies have lifetime annuities. And the earlier that kid is sick, they don't want to kill him. They want him sick for the rest of their lives. For most of its life, the CIA was banned from propagandizing Americans. But we learned that they were doing it anyway. So in 1973, during the Church Committee hearings, we learned that the CIA had a program called Operation Mockingbird, where they had at least 400 members, leading members of the United States Press Corps, and the New York Times, the Washington Post, ABC, CBS, NBC, etc., who were secretly working for the agency and steering news coverage to support CIA priorities. And they agreed at that time to disband Operation Mockingbird in '73. But there's indications they didn't do that, and the CIA today is the biggest funder of journalism around the world.
The biggest funder is through USAID. The United States funds journalism in almost every country in the world. You know, it owns newspapers. It has journalists on it, thousands and thousands of journalists on its payroll. They're not supposed to be doing that in the United States, but you know, in 2016, President Obama changed the law to make it legal now for the CIA to propagandize Americans, and I think.
Doctora Carol Rosin y Werner von Braun. La señora Carol Rosin es una oradora, autora, educadora y estratega militar estadounidense. Trabajó para el señor Werner von Braun, ingeniero mecánico y aeroespacial alemán, que se nacionalizó norteamericano gracias a la Operación Paperclips. Werner es un gran influyente de la cohetería mundial y trabajó, nada más y nada menos, para la NASA. Pero lo que trae a colación a estos personajes es la extraña declaración que hizo Carol Rosin respecto a lo que Werner von Braun sostenía.
And the scare tactics, the spin that was being put on a weapon system. And that was how we identify an enemy. The enemy, at first he said, the enemy against whom we're going to build a space-based weapon system that he thought was a ridiculous idea, unnecessary and very dangerous, not to mention too costly, etc. The strategy that Werner von Braun taught me was that first the Russians are going to be considered to be the enemy. In fact, when I met him in '74, they were the enemy, the identified enemy. We were told that they had killer satellites. We were told that they were coming to get us and control us, the dirty commies, that whole story. First, the Russians were the enemy against whom we're going to build space-based weapons. Then terrorists would be identified, and that was soon to follow. We heard a lot about terrorism. Then we were going to identify third world country crazies. We now call them nations of concern. But he said that would be the third enemy against whom we would be needing to build space-based weapons. And the next enemy was asteroids. Now at this point, he kind of chuckled the first time he said it. Asteroids, against asteroids we're going to build space-based weapons. So it was funny then. And the funniest one of all was against what he called aliens, extraterrestrials. That would be the final card. And over and over and over during the 4 years that I knew him and was giving his speeches for him, he would bring up that last card. And remember, Carol, the last card is the alien card. We're going to have to build space-based weapons against aliens. And all of it, he said, is a lie. A lie. I think I was too naive to know at that time the seriousness of the nature of the spin that was being put on the system. And now the pieces are starting to fall into place. We're building a space-based weapon system based on a premise that is a lie, a spin. And Werner von Braun was trying to hint that to me back in the early 70s and right up until the moment when he died in 1977. What he told me is that there's an accelerated effort in place. He didn't mention a timeline, but he said that it was going to be speeding up faster than anybody could possibly imagine. That the effort to put weapons in space was not only based on a lie, but would accelerate past the point of people even understanding it until it was already up there and too late.
William Henry Gates III, mejor conocido como Bill Gates, es un magnate empresarial, desarrollador de softwares, inversor, autor y conferencista. Famosamente conocido por ser el cofundador de Microsoft, y poco conocido por sus dichos muy polémicos, que los dejo a tu libre interpretación. Hay un viejo refrán que dice, el que avisa, no traiciona, y el que avisó acá es Bill. Este señor tiene una historia tan profunda que tranquilamente le podríamos dedicar una madriguera a él. Si estás interesado, hacémelo saber.
So we have to go from rapidly rising to falling and falling all the way to zero. This equation has 4 factors, a little bit of multiplication. So you've got a thing on the left, CO2, that you want to get to 0. And that's going to be based on the number of people, the services each person's using on average, the energy on average for each service, and the CO2 being put out per unit of energy. So let's look at each one of these and see how we can get this down to zero. Probably one of these numbers is going to have to get pretty near to zero. That's back from high school algebra, but let's take a look. First, we've got population. The world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, healthcare, reproductive health services, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%. But there we see an increase of about 1.3. Today, the greatest risk of global catastrophe doesn't look like this. Instead, it looks like this. If anything kills over 10 million people in the next few decades, it's most likely to be a highly infectious virus rather than a war. Now, part of the reason for this is that we have invested a huge amount in nuclear deterrence, but we've actually invested very little in a system to stop an epidemic. We're not ready for the next epidemic. The failure to prepare could allow the next epidemic to be dramatically more devastating than Ebola. The best lessons, I think, on how to get prepared are, again, what we do for war. We need a medical reserve corps, lots of people who've got the training and background who are ready to go with the expertise. And then we need to pair those medical people with the military, taking advantage of the military's ability to move fast, do logistics, and secure areas. We need to do simulations, germ games, not war games, so that we see where the holes are. Finally, we need lots of advanced R&D in areas of vaccines and diagnostics. There are some big breakthroughs, like adeno-associated virus, that could work very, very quickly. Now, I don't have an exact budget for what this would cost, but I'm quite sure it's very modest compared to the potential harm. The World Bank estimates that if we have a worldwide flu epidemic, global wealth will go down by over $3 trillion, and we'd have millions and millions of deaths. If we start now, we can be ready for the next epidemic.
Hugo Chávez. Hugo Rafael Chávez Frías fue un político y militar venezolano que ocupó el cargo de la presidencia de dicho país desde el año 1999 hasta el año de su fallecimiento en 2013. La política siempre va a evocar sentimientos de cariño, de aversión o de indiferencia. El señor Hugo está aquí porque dijo cosas muy interesantes. Escucha.
Yo creo que los primeros ciudadanos que deberían leer este libro son los ciudadanos, hermanos y hermanas de los Estados Unidos. Porque la amenaza la tienen en su propia casa. El diablo está en casa, pues. El diablo, el propio diablo está en casa. Ayer vino el diablo aquí. Ayer estuvo el diablo aquí. En este mismo lugar huele a azufre todavía esta mesa donde me ha tocado hablar. Ayer, señoras, señores, desde esta misma tribuna, el señor presidente de los Estados Unidos, a quien yo llamo el diablo, vino aquí hablando como dueño del mundo. Como dueño del mundo. Un psiquiatra no estaría de más para analizar el discurso de ayer del presidente de los Estados Unidos. Como vocero del imperialismo vino a dar sus recetas para tratar de mantener el actual esquema de dominación, de explotación y de saqueo a los pueblos del mundo. Para una película de Alfred Hitchcock estaría buena. Incluso yo propondría un título: La receta del diablo. Es decir, el imperialismo norteamericano y aquí lo dice Chomsky, con una claridad meridiana y profunda, está haciendo desesperados esfuerzos por consolidar su sistema hegemónico de dominación. Nosotros no podemos permitir que eso ocurra. No podemos permitir que se instale la dictadura mundial, que se consolide, pues, que se consolide la dictadura mundial. El discurso del presidente tirano mundial, lleno de cinismo, lleno de hipocresía, es la hipocresía imperial, el intento de controlar todo. Ellos quieren imponernos el modelo democrático como lo conciben, la falsa democracia de las élites, y además un modelo democrático muy original, impuesto a bombazos, a bombardeos y a punta de invasiones y de cañonazos. Vaya qué democracia. Habría que revisar las tesis de Aristóteles, ¿no?, y de los primeros que hablaron por allá en Grecia de la democracia, a ver qué modelo de democracia es ese, el que se impone a punta de marines, de invasiones, de agresiones y de bombas. Vino a hablarle, así lo dijo, hoy quiero hablarles directamente a las poblaciones del Oriente Medio. Mi país desea la paz. Esto es cierto. Si nosotros nos vamos por las calles del Bronx, si nosotros nos vamos por las calles de Nueva York, de Washington, de San Diego, de California, de cualquier ciudad, de San Antonio, de San Francisco, y le preguntamos a la gente en las calles, a los ciudadanos estadounidenses, este país quiere la paz. La diferencia está en que el gobierno de este país, de Estados Unidos, no quiere la paz. Quiere imponernos su modelo de explotación y de saqueo y su hegemonía a punta de guerras. Esa es la pequeña diferencia.
¿Cómo quisiera usted que hablaran de Hugo Chávez cuando usted no esté? ¿Cómo quiere que lo recuerden? ¿Cómo quiere que el mundo recuerde a Hugo Chávez?
Dos palabras, dos que son un hombre. Un hombre es lo que soy, eso sí, hombre humano, pues. Hombre humano, porque hay seres humanos que no tienen forma humana, pero no son. Yo soy un humano.
Espero que el gobierno español, hoy, dirigido por mi amigo, el presidente Zapatero, no se vaya a molestar. Yo estoy además respondiendo a un ataque de este señor, que anda por el mundo diciendo que yo soy un peligro para América Latina, que viene a América Latina, y que un día en Caracas me visitó. Ustedes saben quién es José María Aznar. Yo ayer lo dije y lo repito, ese señor es un fascista. Y fue a Caracas y me dijo, vine a visitarte, porque vengo a invitarte a nuestro club. Y yo oyéndolo. Venezuela, Chávez, tiene petróleo. Venezuela puede ir al primer mundo. Basta que tú decidas, tienes un fuerte apoyo popular, político. Bueno, acabamos de ganar las segundas elecciones y la constituyente y aprobar la nueva constitución con más de 60% de apoyo popular. En fin, él venía a invitarme de parte del club, pero que yo tenía que dejar las relaciones con Cuba. Bueno, entonces Aznar todo aquello, una serie de condicionantes y tal. Y yo le hice a Aznar una preguntita nada más, solo una pregunta. Le dije a Aznar, mira, ¿y tú qué opinas de Haití? Esos países, porque tú dices que Venezuela tiene petróleo, puede ir al primer mundo y que yo debería sumarme al club. Y tal, que cambiara el discurso y no sé cuántas cosas. Le pregunto, mira, ¿y Haití? ¿Qué opinas tú? ¿Y Centroamérica? ¿Y África? Yo voy a pedir perdón porque yo voy a decir la palabra exacta que me dijo Aznar y pido perdón a la opinión pública, pero la voy a decir. Me dijo, Chávez, esos se jodieron. Se jodieron. Aquel hombre allí develó todo el rostro horrible del fascismo, racismo y todo lo demás. Por supuesto, nosotros en Venezuela seguimos nuestro camino, no entramos a ese club, porque somos humanos. Y los fascistas no son humanos, tienen forma humana, pero no son humanos. Yo creo que una serpiente es más humana que un fascista.
Natasha Haidt, Si bien no estuvo en los grandes escenarios como los anteriormente nombrados, su caso pide a gritos que la incluya en este post. Natacha fue una modelo, actriz, guionista y conductora de radio argentina, que si de valentía se trata, ella sin dudas está en el podio. Una mujer directa, que se enfrentó a el poder más temido, y el tiempo demostró que la verdad había elegido a Natacha para conocer la luz. Algunas de las cosas que denunció Natacha se cumplieron y aún quedan muchas más.
Estamos hablando de cosas siniestras, Mirta, de algo muy grave, que no se puede jugar. Esto con Independiente se está por una olla de algo que venía pasando y viene pasando en muchos clubes. No solamente Independiente, con los chicos que están en inferiores. Los chicos no denunciaban por miedo porque no tenían recursos. Voy a avanzar. Hablemos.
La información que yo
Graci trabajaba en el colegio Don Bosco de Solís y Moreno, señora, donde lamentablemente practicó la pedofilia con menores. Y Bergoglio lo salva, sabiendo que era pedófilo, y lo traslada ¿a dónde? A manejar un lugar de chicos desamparados que no pueden quejarse. Que es el mismo sistema, lo mismo que pasa con el fútbol, con las pensiones. Y de ahí todo el escándalo que pasó y cómo terminó Graci. Bergoglio fue quien lo saca de Don Bosco por pedofilia y lo mete en un lugar de chicos sin recursos. Cuando vos no tenés recursos, se abusan de vos y no tenés cómo denunciar ni hacer absolutamente nada.
Primero al último, no que yo haya nombrado, de los que están en los medios de comunicación, dijo, yo no me comí ningún pibe, voy a ir a hablar. Nadie, alguno, de todos los que se están hablando, no porque no sé qué, porque la lista, porque Natacha dijo, porque el otro, porque esto es una cama. ¿Alguno dijo, yo no estuve con ningún chico? Más allá puede decir, creo que me están haciendo una cama, ponele. Alguien dijo, yo no estuve ni con ningún tío, nadie.
Yo vi material que había en una tablet, sí. Ella me lo mostró y le dije, ella vino a ofrecerme, decir, mira, tengo este material para ver, y yo le dije, yo en esto no me quiero meter.
Pero Ventu,
no es mi tema.
Una pregunta, ¿te asustó lo que viste?
Sí.
¿Había mucha gente conocida dentro de esos videos?
Había mucha gente conocida.
Yo no me maté, no me suicidé, nada. Quiero que sepan que fue esta mafia. Aunque muera en el intento, a mis hijos les va a quedar una madre que luchó por los derechos que nadie lucha, loco.